Hey, how you doing? This is RJ. Today I'm going to talk about why the writers at Marvel, or at the very least many of the writers at Marvel, are the nastiest people in the world, and how this affects their storytelling. And I would say not just affects it, but constructs the stories that they tell. And again, I'm going to focus on Marvel because at Marvel the crazy is most on display. I'm sure that you could apply this to any of the large comic companies, but I'm going to focus on Marvel. Now, I did another video where I touched on a little bit about this, talking about the people who work for Marvel and how they are a bunch of narcissists. And I'll link that video at the end of this one. But to just condense it down to a couple of sentences, the thing is that narcissism is a disorder of the self. Now, you and I and normal healthy people, we have this self-worth, and we can defend it. We have internal mechanisms to defend our self-worth. I mean, we're deep people, and we can think about any challenges to our self-worth, and we can just ponder them and try and figure them out for ourselves. But narcissists, well, they never develop that. They're shallow. And for one reason or another, they never developed those internal mechanisms. And so, in order to stop themselves from being driven crazy, to make sure that they have some defense of their self-worth, they construct external mechanisms to do so. And those external mechanisms boil down to they need to control everything around them. And of course, if you're a person around them, they need to control you as well. And the thing is that they usually surround themselves with a bunch of people, with a bunch of yes men, so that these people always affirm them, these narcissists. And they're given a funny name, actually. They're usually talked of as flying monkeys. They surround themselves with flying monkeys, like the witch in The Wizard of Oz, right? So they surround themselves with these people who they can browbeat and who actually always do what the narcissist wants, and if they step out of line, they can just beat them into submission, usually browbeat them into submission, to make sure that they never do that again. And these flying monkeys serve a number of purposes, one being to constantly affirm the narcissist, another would be to take any hits that come the narcissist's way, because of course any negativity is blocked out. They need to block it out. It's not allowed within their sphere of influence, and they use their flying monkeys to stop that. And I talked about that in one of my other videos where I went over the Women of Marvel podcast, where they kept on talking about, no, you have to block out all negativity. You can't allow it into your life. Don't even allow these people any time at all. Don't allow any of this at all. And there was a funny conversation between them where one of them said, I wanted people to talk to me about my character for a little bit, so I opened my comms on Twitter, and every one of the women in the background went, no, you can't do that. Oh, heaven forbid they would have a couple of people talk to them and say things to them that were not approved. But no, they thought this was the most horrible thing in the world. But, narcissism, I would say, is just on display at Marvel. You have what? Mark Waid and his supposed tantrums everywhere he goes. You have Sina Grace constantly taking pictures of himself posing and posting them on his Twitter. You got Sana Amanat saying things like, no, I realize that you as an audience think you want this, but that's not what you actually want. Now, this is just, again, narcissism on display. But what happens with their stories? Where do their stories go when they have these people, these narcissists, writing their stories? Well, the thing is that when a narcissist is writing the story, of course, the story is, like everything else, there to affirm them. And so when a normal writer should write a story for a comic, they're thinking about actually building the fan base either of the comic that they're writing, or of the character that they're writing, or of the universe company that they're writing. But for a narcissist and these narcissistic writers at Marvel, they don't think about any of that at all. They are building a fan base for themselves. Not for the character or the book or Marvel or DC or whoever, but simply building a fan base for themselves. And that's it. And they do this in a way by taking the character and making the character themselves. And this is why you have older characters now written in ways that resemble nothing like their history in the comics at all. And the best example of this would be Sina Grace. And you have Bobby Drake, Iceman, and he's not written as Iceman has been written any other time at all. Why? Because he's not Bobby Drake anymore. Sina Grace is writing a story about Sina Grace as if he was Iceman. That is to say, he's writing a story about Sina Grace who has Iceman's powers and is called Bobby Drake. Now, you'll notice that I didn't say Sina Grace wants to be Iceman. No. Because that would take some internal pondering. That would take, I want to be a hero, and a lot of these things that, narcissists can't do. But what he's doing is saying that this character is me. Not, I want to be this character, but this character is me. And that's what he's writing. And you can see this in other books as well. I would say Marika Tamaki over at X-23, she's just writing a story about Marika Tamaki as if she had X-23's powers, and Sana Amanat was specifically told to write Kamala Khan as if she were a young Sana Amanat. So you have it just, again, on display at Marvel. And so the thing is that they write these characters, like Sina Grace writing Iceman, in order for these characters to get praise, so that anybody who praises these characters or these books, the writers take this to be praise of themselves. That is to say, let's say you go onto Twitter and praise Iceman as a great character. Well, Sina Grace is going to think, well, you're praising me, not Bobby Drake, because that's actually me. So that's how they're actually writing these characters. And of course, that's also why if you actually have anything negative to say about the book, then they take this as a personal affront to themselves. Because, of course, that is them in the book. So if you don't like the new Bobby Drake, then you don't like Sina Grace. And, of course, you can't have any criticism coming into his little sphere of influence, and therefore he will attack you straight off. Even if it's the most simple thing in the world, saying, I like your character, but perhaps he would be better if he changed this. And you would just get straight on attacked. And if you didn't kowtow to him, then you get blocked. That's what happens on these Twitter sites for these pros, quote unquote pros. And so it also affects the structure, not just of the characters in the story, but the story itself. Because the story will always revolve around self-affirmation. Because, of course, that's all that the narcissist can deal with. It's self-affirmation. That's all he can allow to come his way. And so since the character is a representation of him, the character must always be self-affirmed. And of course, what the narcissist tries to do in everyday life is to control everything around them so that they get this self-affirmation. But in the comic book that they're writing, they're the actual god of the universe. And so the universe bends and twists and pretzels around to the will of the writer so that it affirms the character so that they themselves are affirmed. And that's the way that they write a story. And of course, that's not a way to write a good story at all. Now, another thing that I wanted to talk about is expressed in a question that I hear a lot. And it's saying, why is this book written, it seems like, at the same time for an 8-year-old and a 30-year-old who wants to act like an 8-year-old? A lot of people ask that question when they read these books. And, well, I think that the answer to that is fairly simple. Well, the 30-year-old who wants to act like an 8-year-old, well, that's your narcissist, of course. Sina Grace is writing the book for Sina Grace. He's writing it for himself. And there you go. There's your 30-year-old that wants to act like an 8-year-old. But they're also writing it for little children. They're specifically targeting little children as their audience all the time. And why? Well, because, of course, the easiest way to get flying monkeys, the easiest way to get fans, is to target people that you can control the easiest. And children are easy to control. So they write these stories for children, supposedly, or what they think children are, because few of them actually know how a child works, and they write them for children so that they can control these children, turn them into fans, turn them into flying monkeys that will defend them, that will self-affirm them. It all comes back to the fact that these people, they're not writing for their audience. This is not a book for the audience to consume. This is a book to produce something for the writer to consume. And the writer is producing fans, probably out of the children that they're trying to write to. They become the product of flying monkeys and fans that the writer will then consume. This is what they're using these books for, to produce the product that they want to consume, which is their own narcissistic self-affirmation, not to produce anything for the actual reader of the book. And this again leads into something else which is a little more disturbing even than that. It's the fact that these people, these narcissists, well, they try to use, especially these children, if they're writing for children, as basically counselors for their problems. And this is why they have things in these books which are supposedly written for children that don't fit with what you should be telling a child. Of course, they're telling these things to the children. They're giving way too much information in a child's book if their audience is supposedly for children. A lot of them are. Marvel keeps on saying that, this is not for you. This is for a younger audience. But these younger audience books have these things in them which you shouldn't be telling these things to children. I mean, that's not information that you should be sharing with a child. Why are they sharing this information with the child? Well, because a child is very highly attuned to emotion, and therefore the narcissist is using the children sort of as a counselor to say, well, if these children affirm me after I told them all of this information, which for a normal person, you shouldn't be telling them that information, well, then, of course, then I get self-affirmation for this activity that other people think is disturbing. And that's what they're doing. That's why they're writing the stories in the way that they are. So that's why they're writing the characters in the way that they are, because the characters are them. That's why they're constructing the story and the plot in the way that it is, to have an endpoint of self-affirmation. And that's why the actual dialogue and the discussions in these books, because usually it's just a bunch of discussions, focuses on things that you really shouldn't be telling a child most of the time, even though they're focusing their audience on children. That's why the stories progress exactly in this way, step by step. Again, it always just feeds back into the self-affirmation of the narcissist. They are trying to produce fans for themselves, not for their book, not for their character. They're trying to produce a product for themselves in writing this book. What they're trying to produce is fandom for themselves. That's all that they are doing. And that's why these stories are completely awful, and why there is such a customer backlash right now. And again, this is why these people are so nasty, so mean, and so difficult to deal with. Anyways, I just wanted to do this small video because it was on my mind about how they're always targeting children and why they're always putting these kinds of stories out there which don't seem to be appropriate for children. And certainly it feeds into not even appropriate just for your normal everyday audience. So if I gave you anything new to think about, hit like, hit the shield in the lower right hand corner of your screen to subscribe, and leave me a message. Tell me whether or not you think my ideas here have any merit. Anyways, I'll see you later. Bye.